Concussion and especially post-concussion syndrome are probably some of the toughest injuries to deal with, especially as an athlete. I've had a pretty tough go with concussions and a 4 to 5 month struggle with post-concussion syndrome. So in this video, I just want to summarize my experience with this injury and then provide the most helpful things that kind of got me out of that funk. Let's dive into my experience and then we'll get into kind of more of the recovery recommendations and things I've learned along the way. So I've probably had close to 10 legitimate concussions. 2 of them lasted maybe a month, and the most serious of which that happened last year in May, I was out for 4 to 5 months. Now, I was a professional mountain bike athlete at that time. I've ridden bikes all my life, so that's where these injuries are happening. And last year, I was pretty much all in on racing full time. It was a big leap for me. So the timing of this injury was really difficult. I actually got a neurological evaluation right off the bat. Turned out that the concussion was maybe worse than I thought. But I kind of thought, oh, all right, this will get better in 2-3 weeks, maybe give it a month and then I can get back to my race schedule. But throughout that whole time, things just didn't get better. I was dealing with major fatigue, brain fog, headaches, light sensitivity. And every time I felt like I was progressing, I would have a good day or two and I would go out and even just go for a walk or something that was a really low threshold activity. In my perspective, I would just instantly get set back to the drawing board. So I eventually had to kind of give up on my plans. I went to San Diego and saw the Kaizen Brain Center, and this was my first kind of foray into finding help from the established medical system. I got a really expensive brain scan, an MRI, and then a neurological evaluation, and this is probably a month and a half, close to 2 months after my injury, and the neurological evaluation came back with some obvious deficiencies, and the brain scan, they said, showed some evidence of structural brain damage from concussions. So obviously at that point that was devastating to hear, and pretty much put all the goals I had put for that season out in the trash, and I really had to knuckle down and focus on my recovery. But what was so frustrating with this experience with the Kaizen Brain Center is what they recommended for recovery was they prescribed an antidepressant and headache medications. From an athlete's perspective who's really motivated about their health, and as someone, a concussed person, like, you can't do much. So there has to be things you can focus on and do to influence your outcomes. And that just wasn't a part of their treatment program at all. It was very limited, and they gave me very kind of depressing outlooks, like, oh, you should expect this to go on for 3 to 6 months, maybe longer. This is something you could deal with your entire life, which may as well be true. But the message they gave me, it felt like I was kind of helpless to whatever it was going to be, and there wasn't much I could do to influence my outcomes besides take these pills. It was really frustrating, and I felt like for being an established brain clinic, they left a lot on the table. And once I realized I wasn't going to get help from them in the way I needed, I did a ton of my own research, and it was the stuff I was able to do on my own for myself, kind of outside of the established medical system, that really helped me recover. And what that was is I focused on supplementation, nutrition, a very calculated and organized approach to exercise, some vestibular exercises I did, and then also focusing on some chiropractic and massage for the neck, which also gets really affected in an injury like this. And then what was also helpful is I was able to find establishments that helped me test my symptoms kind of throughout the recovery process. Those are the things that helped me get out of my funk and make progress. So I'm going to kind of dive into those in greater detail and really go through what I would do if I had this injury again, and how I would approach it from the get-go with the information I now know and the experience I've had. So hopefully this helps you guys out if you, a loved one, are in a similar situation. Once you actually know you have a concussion, sometimes that's fairly obvious, and I would definitely err on the side of safety. These are things that you can implement straight away. So the first thing I would do is supplements. And this is actually something really good just to have on hand. I will provide all the links to everything I'm talking about right now in the description. The majority of my supplement protocol came from a book called Concussion Rescue by Dr. Kabran Chapek. And this gives a really good detailed walkthrough of each supplement and what it does. But getting your hands on the following supplements as quickly as possible is really beneficial. So for me, my full routine is pretty extensive. It includes branched chain amino acids, vitamin D, fish oil, pretty high dosage of fish oil, NAC, N-acetylcysteine, vitamin C, curcumin, acetyl L-carnitine, alpha lipoic acid, L-glutamine, MCT powder, alpha GCP, lion's mane, and a vitamin B12 complex. That's really extensive and really expensive, but the whole goal of this is to reduce the inflammation in your brain and kickstart kind of your body's energy production. And if I were to kind of narrow it down to the supplements that I think are really important, you know, that would be a bit more reasonable to start with. I would say fish oil, NAC, lion's mane, curcumin, alpha lipoic acid, and vitamin D. I guess those are the ones that I feel like helped me out the most. But getting this full regimen of supplements in the right dosages, which you should reference from that book I recommended, is really important.
Something else that helped me out that's also in the supplement category is CBD tinctures. I used a inflammation targeted CBD tincture from Bassier. It's called their Inflame CBD tincture, and I used this in some of the heavier doses, and I feel like that was one of the only things that could kind of subdue my symptoms when they were coming on a little bit more intensely. And then another supplement option that I really like is the Synaquell Plus powder from Thorne. And this is developed specifically for concussion injuries. And I found it to be really effective, and it seems like a really high quality mix of ingredients that are kind of at the cutting edge of the brain and concussion supplement field. So I would recommend taking the Synaquell Plus alongside the other supplement options as well.
And then after you've got a good supplement routine established, the next thing to immediately address is your nutrition. And this was a big one for me. There are even times when I felt, pretty good, and I was feeling like energy was coming back, and I would eat a cheeseburger, like I was traveling on the side, and then I would get sent back, symptoms would come on immediately. So you really have to be super aware of the inflammatory triggers in your body, and a major part of that is food. That's why we're taking all these supplements, is to reduce that inflammation. And then if you just go and eat a bunch of dairy and sugar and bread, like all that stuff was kind of for nothing. So it's a two-pronged approach to really just calm your system down and allow you to start building a base to progress on. So I followed an anti-inflammatory diet. I wasn't perfect, but for 3 to 4 weeks, I was extremely strict. And this is kind of what it took to get me out of my funk. I think this is the biggest factor and the most important thing that's in your control that you can do to influence your health. Cutting out sugar, dairy, gluten, injecting your diet with as much vegetables and high quality produce and meat that you can. I was eating meat throughout this entire process, a lot of grass-fed meats, wild-caught salmon. There's so much information out there on anti-inflammatory diet, but just turbocharging your diet with the good stuff, cutting the bad stuff. I was juicing every morning, just putting all the vegetables I could find through the juicer. Celery juice and all that stuff is super anti-inflammatory. Cooking for me was a really good outlet. One thing I'm gonna try and answer through this entire video is like, what do you do? You can't go out there and participate in your normal life. And there's all these recommendations on, the specific therapies and stuff. But like one of the most challenging things is, what do you do with your time? You can't just be sitting there, or at least, most people, especially if you're an athlete, it's just so hard to sit there. So cooking 3 quality meals a day and really investing the time and resources into having that be super dialed is one of the best outlets I found for the recovery. Not only because it kept me busy and it was something that was benefiting me, but the diet itself is extremely, extremely important. I'll put some links into some general guidelines on anti-inflammatory diets, but it's really not that complicated. Like, once you know a few principles, it's pretty obvious like what's healthy for you, what's not. If you're in this position, you'll know with your symptoms kind of what's triggering that. So nutrition supplements, those can be implemented immediately. One thing that I think is also overlooked that should be addressed fairly early on is the neck, specifically having to do with whiplash. So just getting massages, even if it's a friend or yourself, massaging your neck, but getting into a professional massage therapist and having them focus on releasing your neck muscles. A lot of the same symptoms that come with concussion are symptoms of whiplash. So to kind of focus on what is actually affecting your brain and your concussion, it's good to kind of just get the neck out of the way and really make sure that's not affecting your concussion symptoms. So massage is great to release it. Chiropractic adjustments are also good, but I think more specifically, going to an upper cervical chiropractor that really focuses on that last vertebrae, the highest vertebrae on your neck that connects to your skull. That's where a lot of your blood flow and your nerves, channel through. So if that's kinked, it can really throw you off. And that is a pretty expensive treatment, but I've had some friends have really good success with it. And it's something that can't really hurt you if you can seek out the help for it. It's something I got later in my recovery, and I honestly do feel like it helped. But looking back, it's something that I would definitely chase earlier on in my recovery. So just making sure your neck is in a good place is really important, so you can really focus on what's actually affecting your brain. The next kind of batch of treatments I did were some really basic vestibular exercises. And these are a good way to kind of track your progress as well. Not every concussion has a vestibular element to it. Mine definitely did, but just like walking in a straight line, toe to toe with your eyes closed, that's something that I think most people can do fairly reliably, but if you have a concussion and your vestibular system's out of whack, when you close your eyes, that's when you have to rely on your vestibular system to balance you. But if you can't, stand on one leg with your eyes closed, or walk in a straight line, heel to toe with your eyes closed, that means, your vestibular system is still recovering. And it's really depressing for an athlete that, prides themselves on, coordination and physical ability. And, for a long time, I couldn't stand up on one leg with my eyes closed. That kind of hurts a little bit, but, doing that multiple times a day, you don't want to overdo it because it does, takes some mental energy. But those are just basic things. And then if you want to add a little, spice to the standing on one leg thing, you can start doing figure eights with your opposite arm to kind of, again, just challenge your vestibular system a little more. Those are some easy exercises to implement. And then the final piece of the puzzle, the thing that really propelled me to a full recovery, is a physical exercise protocol. So if there's a concussion clinic in your area, this is something I would definitely inquire about. Basically, they do a really structured ramp test that like slowly ups your heart rate in a really organized manner, and then you're reporting your symptoms on a scale of 1 to 10. It basically eventually gives you a heart rate threshold where your symptoms are coming on. And if you're able to operate at 70–80% of that for 20 to 30 minutes a day, that's what's able to really get the benefit from that exercise, get blood flow to the brain, and really build a bit of resilience back into your system without overdoing it. It's one of the toughest balances throughout this entire process, is finding where that limit is. And I think a general protocol is like, 1 to 2 days after your injury, you want to be out there going for walks, and then if the walks feel good, go for longer walks. Like, you don't want to be running immediately. And if you're an athlete and you have a heart rate monitor, I would just keep an eye on that. And there is this specific test, which I think is really good to seek out. But, if you're in tune with your body, I felt like I was too. Like, if you just, are on a spin bike or on a treadmill and just keep, increasing the incline every minute or so and slowly ramp up your heart rate in a very controlled manner, you'll know when those symptoms come on. And then as soon as they get, more than 6 or 7, you want to shut it off. And that's where you know where your limit is. You really, throughout this physical exertion process and really building yourself back up, it's really important for you to be honest with yourself and err on the side of caution. Even times when I felt like I was doing okay in the moment, I would come back home or the next day and I would really pay the price for it. So finding that happy medium, it's like the old knowledge was just continual rest until you were better. Now a ton of data supports a slow, organized buildup of exercise and your exercise threshold back to recovery. It's really hard to recommend a specific protocol for any person, but getting that test really helps you out. And if that isn't available to you or you can't afford it, just start a really slow ramp program. And then again, that's something that you can do with your time, just walking around the block for 30 or 40 minutes, especially as an athlete that's used to, going after much bigger and bolder things. It feels stupid and unmotivating a lot of times, but those walks around the block every day or every other day, depending on where you're at, that is what's going to start building your base, getting a bit of blood flow to the brain, and start kind of stimulating your body into the recovery process. So really, those are the things that really helped me out: supplementation, nutrition, exercise, some massage stuff, some chiropractic adjustment, some vestibular exercises. These are all things you can do by yourself with a little more research and a little no cost. Again, I'll put links to everything that I talked about in the description from the actual professionals. I am not a medical professional, so take everything I say with a grain of salt. This is just coming from someone who's lived this and wants to, help other people out in a similar situation. So before I go, I think I just want to touch on some concepts that I think really helped me out through this process. And this is stuff that isn't, a specific therapy or practice, but it's just more of a mindset that I think can really help perspective on this. So the biggest thing is energy management. And you just have to reset your expectations really low. Especially for an athlete, your expectations are so high of your physical ability, what you're normally used to. You just have a smaller energy bank to pull from. So I feel like a lot of times I felt good, you know, at the beginning of the day, I would, you know, start doing stuff, and then, you know, I would crash, and then, you know, going too far is detrimental to your recovery. Just being realistic with your energy management is super important, and really listening to your body and being honest with yourself. I think for me, I had in mind when I got injured, like, oh, you know, 2 weeks I can deal with, all right, in a month I'll be good. And then like I set my recovery schedule to 2 weeks. You know, at that point, it's like, all right, I'll take it easy for these days. On Thursday, I should be feeling better, and then I'll do more, and then I'll do more, and then you know, at the end of those 2 weeks, I'll be good. But if your body isn't actually tracking that, holding that schedule is going to be super detrimental, and it was to me. So you really have to give up that schedule that you have in your head that you think this is going to happen, and really just be looking at your body, listening to it, and taking it day by day, which is really hard to do. It's so challenging. There was a moment where I kind of gave into this injury, you know, and that was so hard to do. It was a pretty emotional moment when I kind of just accepted that my life is now focused on recovering from this injury, not all these plans I had, not all these goals that I had been working towards for so long. Like, all that will come in time, but there's a certain place, or there's a certain time when the injury has to be the priority. And I think it's tough, but just knowing that something good will come of this is a key thing to keep in mind. Like, all of this work you're doing is gonna pay off in the long run. Like, the nutrition that I learned during this time has helped me out immensely with my practices going forward. You know, I've continued to take a lot of the supplements that I think help my mental state. And it was a super challenging time, but it really helped me kind of evaluate the relationship I have with my body. And yeah, I think I'm better for having gone through this experience, even though it was probably the hardest thing I've ever done. You know, it's not like an arm where you have a date and there's a lot of data to back up that your arm's going to be good by that date. The constant question mark on the concussion thing and how specific it is to everyone is the most challenging part. And I think once you've gone down a certain level of recovery, you've gone back to daily life, one of the hardest things to do is kind of remove yourself from that hyper analytical, self-analyzing, always monitoring where your symptoms are, and just kind of like letting that go a little bit. And that's something that I think needs to be a part of the plan all the way through, is like, you have to be in tune with your body, but like being so constantly analytical about how you're feeling gets really exhausting. So at different times during the recovery process, and especially once you reach a certain point, there has to be a level of self-acceptance where you can't always be comparing yourself to how you think you felt 6 months ago. It's, all right, my symptoms have subsided and this is who I am now. You know, regardless if that's a little different from how you felt 6 months ago, the only place to be is a level of self-acceptance while doing the best you can to maintain your health with regards to the injury. So, and that's kind of where I'm at now, is, you know, I've really struggled with that. Like, there's times when I'm like, do I really feel right? But it's like, what is right? And as long as I'm doing things to, you know, keep myself healthy, sometimes that brings me back to some good practices. There's a level of self-acceptance that ends up needing to happen. So, and finally, some last, you know, maybe misconceptions. You don't just want to sit there and do nothing. That's pretty depressing. You know, listen to your medical professionals, but there are things you can do to influence these outcomes. And one thing that I heard, and something that I kind of didn't really stick to, is I think screen time on the phone is really bad. It's really close. It's really straining on your eye. But I think watching TV in limited quantities from a distance isn't the worst. Again, it's like there's all these recovery protocols, but like there's a huge mental health aspect to it. And it's like you can't always punish yourself for, just needing to relax and like do something with your time. And I'd say like watching an hour of TV a day, 2 hours of TV from a distance in limited quantity. Yeah, don't watch something that's like super electro, stimulating, but like a documentary. And for me, listening to podcasts was also super helpful. I could be learning something, stimulating my brain a little bit, but having a really low energy output, listening to it with my eyes closed, were things that really helped me get through this. So for my day-to-day, it was focusing on my cooking, taking the time to make my fancy juice in the morning, going on walks that progressed to bike rides and more physical activity as I went along, listening to podcasts, stretching, doing yoga, being mindful of not a lot of like head down things that bring a lot of pressure to the brain. Just outside of doing things specifically for the concussion, just focusing on different ways I can improve my health, things that I necessarily wouldn't have focused on had I had been on my normal athlete program, that I could take the time to do in my situation. So stretching, yoga, meditation, there's plenty of other things that you can work on to just keep you working towards a positive outcome.
The last thing I would recommend is finding somewhere to get testing throughout your recovery process. I think a really good resource is looking at your local university, seeing if they have a concussion program there. I was able to go to the University of Reno and get a free evaluation. If not, investing a little bit in getting tested throughout the recovery process really helps just track where you're at. I would definitely also recommend getting a baseline test before you're in a concussion situation, because then it's much easier to compare yourself versus yourself instead of just like more vague averages, and that can really help pinpoint where your deficiencies are.
Yeah, the emotional side is super tough, but I guess my message is that you will get through this. If you're in the YouTube rabbit hole right now, concussed, looking for help, things will get better. Rely on your family, your friends, and this is a serious thing, but it's an injury that you can recover from. So hopefully that helped. That's my experience. And again, everything that I've referenced, I'll try and leave in the description. And yeah, so I hope if you ever come into this injury, whether it's through yourself down the road, whether it's right now or a friend, hopefully this information helps you guys out. So anyway, that's all I got for today. I'll see you guys in the next video.